A lot of you guys know my dad, Lowell Cohn. Some of you are just getting to know him now through our podcast on YouTube. And if you don't know who he is, he covered Bay Area sports for 40 years. And he just wrote a book called Gloves Off. And it's fantastic. It's like a memoir, but it's a series of short stories from his days as a sports writer. And I'm in it. There's a chapter where I'm a character. So I figured I'd read it to you, give you a sneak peek of my dad's book. And if you like it, you can buy it right now on Amazon. This is chapter 43. It's called Mensch, Steve Young as usual. Here it is. This is by my dad, Lowell Cohn. My son wanted to meet Steve Young. The 49ers had just won the Super Bowl in 1995, and Young had the greatest season up to that time of any quarterback ever. And my son was 7 years old and believed in heroes. I mentioned my son Grant to Young, how Grant longed to meet him. This was not easy for me. I kept my personal life and professional life separate. And even though I liked Young, as did most writers who covered him, we were not friends. Not in any way you'd call a person your friend. I covered him. Young's eyes lit up. He said, sure, bring him down to the facility. Let's make a date, which I did. My son wore a 49ers cap, too big for him. It slid down his eyes, and he carried a reporter's notebook and a Sharpie. He was quiet on the drive from Oakland to Santa Clara. I could put myself in his place. Imagine myself at the age of 7, driving somewhere to meet Duke Snider. We parked the car and walked into the broad, high public area of 49ers headquarters, the room with Super Bowl trophies and an image of Marie DeBartolo, mother of 49ers owner Eddie DeBartolo Jr. It looked like a cathedral, and in a way, it was. My son was speechless. I told the attendant we were here for Steve Young. The attendant said Young would appear shortly. Sit down in the waiting area. There were 2 chairs facing each other. Grant, we called him Iggy, sat in my lap so Young could sit in the other chair. After a few minutes, Young came through a door. To say he came is incorrect. He strode. He advanced. He was a handsome young man in the fullness of his physical prime, and we felt that and saw that. He wore shorts and a 49ers t-shirt, and his legs were muscled and his face was red with the blood of life. And he smiled because he understood what this meant to a boy. He sat down in the chair and looked at me. Lowell, you sit there and don't say a word. This is between Iggy and me. He sure knew how to create the moment. I shut up. Young and Iggy made small talk. Iggy said he was a 49ers fan, and Young nodded and grinned, although he must have heard that a million times. He asked Iggy what sports he liked, tailored the conversation to a child, and I was grateful. After a while, Young said, Iggy, do you have any questions for me? Yes, Iggy said, surprisingly poised. What does it feel like to throw a spiral? Young thought about that. Look at my hand, he said. He moved his famous left hand toward Iggy, and Iggy held it. Looked at Young confused. What was Young getting at? My hand is small, Young said. Joe has larger hands. He meant Joe Montana. I love to throw perfect spirals, but I don't always because of my hand size, he said. Sometimes I throw an interception, but I leave the field happy because I threw a perfect spiral. He and Iggy laughed. Young pointed to Iggy's cap. Would you like me to sign it? He asked. Iggy stared at Young. Moses seeing the burning bush. Oh yes. Iggy took off the cap and Young signed it. And I thought, it's time to leave. But it wasn't. Do you want Jerry to sign your hat? Young asked, meaning Jerry Rice. Iggy's eyes lit up. Yes, he said. Done, Young said. He took the cap and strode back through the door to the off-limits area. Iggy and I waited alone a long time. Rice and I did not get along. We do now. And I imagine Young having to convince Rice to sign for Lowell Cohn's kid. After 15 minutes, Young appeared, a frown on his face. I can't find Jerry, he said. Please don't worry about it, I said, trying to please, wanting not to make trouble, wanting not to impose or presume. The usual Jewish stuff. I moved Iggy off my lap and began to leave. No, Young almost shouted. Don't go. I'll find Jerry. It may take a little time. That's what I wanted to tell you. We sat down again. I felt rebuked. While we waited, tight end Brent Jones wandered by. I introduced Iggy, and Iggy said Steve was getting Jerry Rice to sign his cap. Not on your life, I thought. Jones said, what about me? Can't I sign? Now 3 of us waited for Young. Young reappeared. Jerry was eating lunch alone in a classroom, he said. He showed Iggy the cap with Rice's signature. Jones grabbed the cap and the Sharpie, and he signed it too. Iggy had scored. Then Jones and Young shook Iggy's hand and left and got back to work. On the drive home, Iggy was thoughtful. So was I. I had come through as a father big time, was proud of myself, felt like a hero. I had given Iggy something most fathers couldn't, and he would remember it his whole life and love me more for it. Iggy looked at me with an angelic smile on his face. Thank you, he said. Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure doing that for you. Just one thing, he said. What's that? I asked in a confident, generous, everything is wonderful with the world voice. I wish Steve was my dad. That's the chapter, and I still have that hat that Steve Young, Jerry Rice, and Brent Jones signed, and I still would take Steve Young as my dad, even though I do love my real dad very much. Go buy Gloves Off now at Amazon or any place books are sold. Thanks for listening.